Welcome back to the Layback podcast. Joining us today is Tim Campos, the Director of Player Development at Albuquerque Baseball Academy out in New Mexico. They have quite a bit of a hidden gem out there. They've developed some top tier talent, have a guy recently made the debut in the show that is absolutely dominating right now. We'll probably chat a little bit about that down the line, but Tim has been the backbone of a lot of this, bringing in education, development, processes, and really just an awesome environment to the Albuquerque Baseball Academy. We met at the bridge seminar very briefly at Wake Forest back in, I guess that was December of 2022, and then connected officially this past winter in 2023, where we really springboarded our relationship from there. But calling Tim the director of player development barely even describes everything that he has done in the baseball world. He really is a lifelong learner, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to him, let Tim cover anything we might have missed. Thanks for joining us today, Tim.
I really appreciate you having me on, and really look forward to this conversation. Excited to kind of dive into a few things, and I really appreciate the opportunity. We've here at Albuquerque Baseball Academy. Albuquerque Baseball Academy has been around since really 1998. We got going with teams in around 2002. Back then, I was a high school coach. Actually, I had my own little academy, and I'm from a town called Gallup, New Mexico. It's a small 22,000 population town right in the middle of the heart of the Navajo Reservation on the western end of New Mexico, Four Corners area. We sit right next to a hotbed, really a good baseball hotbed of Farmington, New Mexico. It's the home of the Connie Mack World Series. It's really a wonderful, wonderful venue. But Gallup, New Mexico is where I was born and raised. Graduated from there in way back in '94. But I went to New Mexico Military Institute, played baseball at New Mexico Military Institute, all while I was getting my commission in the Army. So I wanted to go military. My goal was to be a coach, to be in the National Guard, and to kind of give back. That was my deal. And so I went to New Mexico military, got my commission in the Army in 2 years. So it's like the youngest second lieutenant in the whole United States Army at 19. And then probably a month after, I got diagnosed with stage 4 malignant melanoma. They took out a large portion of my back to do that. And that kind of somewhat ended my baseball career. I tried to go play one more year. I went to Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri, just outside of St. Louis. Division II, and basically my velo went from probably mid 80s to 70 poo without part of my back muscle. It was a little difficult, but I wanted to give it a whirl, do my due diligence. But that ended my baseball career. I got completely out of baseball for a couple of years. Went to the car business, and I got like this $1 million education on psychology in the car business. I spent 8 years managing car dealerships, and then really found my way back into baseball back in my hometown. Got in and took over like literally a little league team, 11-year-old team. I walked into a little league meeting. I said, does anybody need help? And they're like, yeah, we got a team that needs a coach. And so I coached an 11-year-old team. Of course, it was the draft of the kids that never played. So we went 1-11, and that one win was a forfeit. And then the next year we proceeded to take second in the league. It was awesome. But I noticed something there. So this was probably 2003, 2004. We went to like this Triple Crown tournament in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I looked and I noticed something. The game had changed. Like the development had already changed. People were being more athletic, and I began to question the way that I was trained, the way that I grew up in baseball, and the stuff that I taught, which was very back to Ted Umansky on baseball. It was like the stride, hips, hands, the whole 9 yards. I mean, Tom Umansky, I think was the name, is the videos. And it literally was the regimented process, right? So I'm watching, I'm like, hey, man, baseball's changing. I was finishing up my teaching degree, and I got a email or something that said Ultimate Pitching Coaches Boot Camp in Houston, Texas. And Ron Woolforth was putting this on. And so it was 2005. I had like $700 left over from a student loan, and I literally bought a plane ticket and on a whim went to Houston. that basically changed course for me.
That's a wild ride into the baseball world, but I do want to call on one thing is now retroactively you can call yourself a D1 baseball player because Lindenwood now a D1 school. So I
Right.
don't know, maybe people won't check the history, they won't check the notes on that. Just you're a D1 guy. You no sense calling
Yeah.
yourself a JUCO and D2 guy anymore. You got D1 pedigree, Tim.
Yeah, no, I think my claim to fame, or not my claim to fame, our claim to fame at Lindenwood when I was there was a girl. Her name was Shandy Finney. She ended up being like the Miss USA, and yeah, so I was like, hey, that's all I knew Lindenwood. We had a Miss USA, so that was good, right?
What a great claim to fame. But
Yeah.
that's crazy. So your first debut into the coaching world, 1-11 with a group of 11-year-olds, and you already see the revolution in the baseball world from that point. So did you instantly know that you needed to do something different? Or was it just this eye-opening, wow, like what's going on? What else could be out there? Was it instantly trying to make a change for you, or was it kind of going on this like awe-inspiring adventure to learn as much as you could?
I think growing up, I've always been like just an avid learner. I wanted to know the why. I was that kid that just wanted to know why. I loved practice. I loved throwing. I loved training. We had a really good program in high school, and we had a really good coach. He was a D1 guy that came back and was studying to be a minister in Gallup, New Mexico, on the reservation, and that was his kind of like his mission trip. And I think he was at Pan American University, and then eventually came in through Gallup, and he just brought this brand of baseball. But it was a very regimented, very disciplined, very kind of old school approach, and it was it was great. Like there was a guy in Farmington. His name was Tom McLemore. He's a legend. Like this guy had, I mean, up teen state championships. I think he's been a scout with the Atlanta Braves for years during their heyday. Like he's just an absolute legend of a coach. And he had a system called Kaizen, and it was like all of the small parts, back from the Toyota GM days, that same concept of Kaizen, small incremental improvements, and he applied it to baseball. Just getting all that whole system. That's kind of where we're at. But what I noticed was, just trying to be a consummate learner, I just noticed that, teaching the way that I learned and that I was taught, there was something different going on. There was something more fluid, more dynamic. There was something more athletic taking place. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and so I wanted to know the why. I wanted to know if what I was doing was wrong. I've always kind of been that person that like wanted to stay curious and challenged myself to be slightly beyond my present capabilities, and just trying to like, okay, maybe I'm slightly off with something, and I better go find out if I'm wrong, or if I'm doing right. And it just so happened there was a kid. I was in the car business, and his dad was like our finance director, and the kid was huge. He was like 6 foot, 12-year-old, right? This big kid, tremendous potential. And he was talking. I was like, oh, I said, I can help him pitch, and I was teaching him the rocker step, pivot, balance point, rocker step, pivot, balance point, get to the power tee, get to the strike, all these optimal positions, right? And taught him that was my, I mean, I had it down to a regimen. You got to do 20 rocker steps. You got to do 20 rocker steps, pivot, balance point. You got to hold your balance point for 30 seconds. You know what I mean? And it was like literally up, down, out, the whole 9 yards. And the kid was going to be good no matter, like, that's the whole thing, is kids make you look like a really good coach. So yeah, that was my start. And I just didn't want to screw this kid up. I didn't want to mess up. I went to Ron Wolforce at this camp. And I think by just happenstance, the year that I went, it was the year that Paul Nyman was there, and he was speaking. We're sitting in the Greenpoint Marriott or whatever it is in downtown Houston, or just outside of Spring, Texas, whatever. And he asked, he goes, how many of you guys are teaching balance point and the power tee? And of the 200 people, 180 hands went up. And he just said, well, you're freaking hurting kids. And everybody looked around like, who's this dude? Like what? And then he proceeded for the next hour to literally mop the floor with all of us. And he presented his 100-mile-per-hour delivery, or the 90-mile-per-hour delivery, in from a mechanic standpoint, from a different perspective. And it just kicked down a bunch of doors. And really that perspective came, and along with that was the genius of Paul Nyman, but it was also the genius of Ron Wolforth and Brent Strom, because the one thing that I think about Ron Wolforth that I would attribute to him more than anything else is he's one of the best practical applicators of information I've ever seen. You take information, you get information from all these different sources, and how do you practically apply it to where it makes an effect on a training environment? And he just was phenomenal. When we first sat down in 2005, when he went through and he talked about just a totally different model, and the model that came from was the Bernstein principle, right? The body will organize itself based upon the goal of the activity. And that principle in its infancy in my mind, in the baseball mind, was huge. If you give the body a goal, the body's going to organize itself based on that goal. So if your intent is to throw 90 miles an hour, your body's going to organize itself to do that. If my intent is to throw a strike and win today's game, my body's going to organize itself to do that. And there's windows of adaptation that need to take place. If you look at the dynamics of a Latin-born player compared to an American-born player, where there's models of instruction, the goal was different. The goal was, I need to throw 90 to get off the island. And the goal here was, I need to win this 11U Little League game. Just throw strikes. The whole dynamic is different. And yeah, you talked about, I think it was Arnold Palmer, when his dad was training him. He just said, hey, listen, I want you to get to the tee box. I want you to swing this club as hard as you possibly can. And at first it was whack, whack, whack. And then eventually it was whack, whack. And then eventually it's whack. And he changed golf because he had the longest drive of anybody out there. And it changed the game. What we've learned from since then is that, not only do you have the Bernstein principle, the body organized, you just can't have intent. You can have intent all you want, but you got to also have constraints. You got to also have some thought process behind that, because you can't just hit the weighted balls. You can't just hit the gas pedal all the time, because then, your body will also organize itself into injury. It's been really an interesting dynamic going through this, but it really centered around that year in 2005, 2006, going into that camp. And I remember sitting there next to Wes Johnson, who was at, like a high school, and Derek Johnson, who was at, a D3 school getting ready to be going to Vanderbilt. Andy McKay, who was an assistant for Jerry Weinstein at Sac City. And, I remember Kyle Bodie when he came in, presented on kettlebells, when Trevor Bauer was like a sophomore, junior in high school, and watching those guys running around, just kind of going through the process. And it was cool because every year you go back and you see this evolution. And back then Ron would do these, he called it the inner circle. And it was basically a CD that you would get every month. He would send a CD. It was like, that's your podcast, right? And he would talk with Gary Hatch out of he was a high school coach out of the Northwest, out of Seattle area. Talk with Alan Yeager on the long toss. And then the next year it was Eric Cressy, basically Ron and Brent Strom. And then you introduce Perry Husband, which is a whole different dynamic in effective velocity. And then he would also bring in someone that was contrarian to him. And so, Paul Nyman. And then it was Mike Marshall, Dr. Mike Marshall, the ultimate, contrarian. I remember we're at Scotland Yard in Houston, and Brent Strom had to follow Mike Marshall. And Mike Marshall's talking about pronation curveball and all this stuff. And it's like everybody's going, what the heck? And Brent Strom did something so magical after that talk. He comes up to speak to the podium, and he's like, how do I follow Dr. Mike Marshall? Like, after all of that information, how do you follow that? And Brett, in his humble, genius, he said, the one thing that really made so much sense to me is right after release, how you pronate through the ball, and how that really, the arm would just relax it out and it never bangs. And there was something to that. He's like, he recognized a key piece of that. And I think Ron, being the practical applicator that he is, took that and took some of the things that Mike Marshall was doing and applied them. Like, hey, let's that's where pivot picks came from. They were called the Marshall 1, the Marshall 2. And before then it was lawnmowers. I remember you would turn and go and do this, the move. But what we were really focused on was the pronation aspect of it, right? Well, you can't teach pronation. It happens naturally. Well, now you give the body a heavy ball, and it's using the constraints-led approach. It's going to organize itself to be really safe. And so it really, that drill really worked, and it had a profound effect on kids. But again, going back to the Bernstein principle, the body organizes itself based upon goal activity. When you start doing the lawnmower, you start doing the Marshalls, right? And you're throwing to the center of the wall. what you notice over the course of time is kids start cutting the ball. And I was noticing because I was, we had all the kids, and all of a sudden, like, this is before Rapsodo and before TrackMan, and you couldn't really see. It was like, why are all these kids cutting the ball? And this is another thing that Ron said that was really amazing is if you don't know the inherent strength and the inherent weakness of the drill, you probably shouldn't be using it. And the strength of like a pivot pick is that you get really good layback. If you do it right, you get really good pronation. The arm goes through a really good arm spiral. But if you're not throwing it to a target, then guess what? You're going to build a cutter. And you're literally going to take some guys out of some movement preferences. You've got to know those limitations of it. And so it is really cool because, like I said, I don't want to bounce around too much, but then I remember sitting next to Kyle Bodie, and we were talking, and that year, Wes Johnson, I think he was the volley assistant at Dallas Baptist. And it was during the time when Tom House came out with the holds, right? The weighted ball holds. The Steve Dalabar story came on HBO, and he had this big resurgence and made it back, and the holds. And so he had access to a lab there in Dallas, and he was using the holds. And what was amazing during his presentation was he said, if we got a kid that's not throwing the underload faster than he's throwing the 5 ounce or the 6 ounce, like he's got a deceleration problem. Like there's those muscles aren't strong enough on the back end. And so we'll put him on this hold program, and we'll strengthen up the back end of the shoulder. And then all of a sudden his underload just jumps up because now the body's like, go ahead. Like, I got you. I got the strength now to do that. We'll let you accelerate. And so we're talking about it, and we're looking, and I remember sitting next to Kyle, and I'm thinking about the concepts of blending, because the concept of blending of the body, again, the body organizes based on the task. And so when you do a hold, it creates a pushy arm action, because of the body knows that it's not going to let go, and the elbow drops and it pushes out. There could be a negative blend because it's so close to the activity, right? Randy and those guys came up with the sock throws, which was, again, in itself genius. But one of the things that Kyle and I talked about, well, why not just use a wrist weight? Because now the body doesn't recognize that as an implement. You're still getting the training effect of the pronation and working on the backside of the arm, but you're not getting the negative blend. So let's just use the wrist weights in our pre-through routine to get the pattern. And sure enough, I think that year, I think Trevor got drafted, and he was struggling with Diamondbacks, and they had talked, and I think that was one of the conversations that they had. It was like, no, let's just use the wrist weight. So if you do this drill with the wrist weight, you're going to pattern this movement, and it's not going to have a negative blend. And sure enough, man, it worked. There's the consequences. I think Trevor had the highest average velo going into spring training that next year, and is because the back of his shoulder was bullet strong and those things. And so, but all those things came from a consequence. There's a consequence to training. There's a consequence to how we train. And so, again, if you don't know the strength of the drill or weakness of it, you just be careful with what you're using. This whole process that happened, but it all came back to, again, how do you apply that? And it was awesome, just kind of going through that dynamic. There's so much that was learned from 2005. I left Ron's, and the thing about when you left Ron didn't, they didn't give you, they didn't say, okay, here's the program. They didn't say, here, you do this many reps of this and this many sets. You do this drill first, you do this drill. They didn't do that. He's like, here's all the information. I want you to go back home and make it your own. Like, go back home and apply it to your environment. And that was the genius part of it. And then I think what Kyle did a great job of is he took that and, hey, let's just systemize this, right? Let's systemize this and let's test if it works. Because what the genius of Kyle, what Kyle did was like, I want to know if it works. Like, right? It's the best thing about research is, how do you control it? How do you test it to see if this works or not? You know what I mean? And so he wanted to he looked at all of the research that was out there, Duran studies and all those things, and said, yeah, weighted balls, it makes sense, it works. Let's see if we can duplicate it. And researching was like, hey, it works, so what works? What does that mean? Well, if you do these many sets and reps, and if you do this patterning, it works. If you use these constraint drills, it's going to do this. And so that was the infancy of it, right? It was taking what I think a lot of people were doing. Like I was doing my own stuff that I had learned from Ron's in my own way. And then when Dry Leg came on, he's like, okay, like, so I took bits and pieces from this. And then you can't, once something kind of goes viral, you can't, like, I would call it a Marshall, like the pivot pick was a Marshall. I just called them lawnmowers. And it's like, well, everyone's calling them a pivot pick, so I'm just going to call them pivot picks. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Adapt or die.
yeah, like, it was called there was a torque and then a walking torque. Well, that's a rolling. Okay, well, let's just call it a rolling so that I don't confuse, because I'd put walking torques and then my kids would come up, Coach, what's a walking torque? It's a rolling. Okay, I got you. You know what I mean? And so it's like just trying to, get those pieces, which, like I said, Kyle did an amazing job of just kind of, putting that stuff in. And there's always the misapplication. Here's a great story is like my first year after 2005, I went back and, you take your stuff back. I started working with my high school kids doing med ball wall and, doing some of the plyo care stuff. And I go back to Ron's next year and he's telling me a story. He's like, he goes, one of the coaches that left after the boot camp called me. He goes, Coach, man, he goes, I love the stuff. Kids are getting strong and fast. He goes, but man, he goes, our catchers are getting wore out by having to catch those darn balls. They were somebody was throwing the freaking 2-pound or 1-pound ball to a stinking catcher. And it's like, you can't fix stupid. That was my commencement speech at New Mexico military was, ignorance is temporary, stupidity is forever. And so there's always the misapplication of stuff, but it was really interesting to see that progression go in and to learn kind of where those things at. And so, I back in 2006, 2007, I'd come back and I took over my high school program in 2006 back home, and we're doing armbands and we're doing straight shoulder. We're throwing medicine balls before a game, and people are looking over at me like, what is this idiot doing? Like, it's like, we're just, trying to recruit what's not awake. You know what I mean? We're trying to do a wake up warm up, and we're doing this stuff. And that carried on for some years. And I built a program in my hometown, and we rebuilt that program and qualified for state for the first time in like 18 years. Everything was going great. And then they split my school district. They took my school district and they said, well, all these kids that you've been developing, guess what? They're all over at this school now. And they just like completely it was violated the Open Meetings Act. I mean, it was atrocious. And so I was
Had to be heartbreaking.
I mean, it destroyed me, because nothing more in my life that I want to do than just to go back to my hometown and rebuild a program there and just give back. And I loved it. I was home. My family had been in the Gallup since the mid 1800s. I mean, it was like, that's like every time I drive there, it's like an amazing community, amazing organization. Like it was just awesome. And then they just messed it up. Like there's like 5 high schools in a town of 22,000 people now. It's just the epitome of, but anyway, so I was weird because that year I was coaching my summer group. I ran into a guy that I first met at Ron's. His name is Jeremy Jorgensen. This guy was a genius, and he was the head coach at Doane College, an NAI school in Crete, Nebraska. Jeremy, I saw him in Phoenix at a tournament, and I was telling him a story about how they did this to the school district, and he's like, "Hey man, why don't you come be a grad assistant? I'll pay for your master's, and all I want you to do is I'm going to give you my freshmen, we have a JV squad, and if you can develop 1 or 2 arms out of there, then I win. We win." And I'm like, great. So I literally went back home. I turned in my resignation. I packed the little that I had and I drove to Crete, Nebraska, and I took over a JV squad in Crete, Nebraska, and met Coach Altman's there, who's the head coach now, was the assistant, and Elliot Engel, who's the pitching coach for them now, was their mainline pitcher, and that's what we did. We took the Eric Bender protocol, right? Eric Bender was is now the player development coordinator for the Cleveland Indians. He was trained at Trinity, and we took the Bender protocol, which was get out to 300 feet and then get on a mound and throw, and then back out to 300 feet and get on the mound and throw, right? So, I mean, and there's a whole explanation of why that worked, but I put that in with a couple kids and like just massive improvements on different things. Just and Jeremy was very, very focused on, like, we had a similar thought process on things, and so I was there for a year and a half. Another gentleman that I met at Ron Wolf's place was he was at Alcorn State. His name is David Gomez. He goes, "Hey man, I might get this job at Eastern New Mexico University. If I get it, will you come be the pitching coach?" I'm like, dude, it's 5 degrees in Crete, Nebraska right now, and it's May 5th. Like, this is brutal. Like, yes, I'll come back to New Mexico. And so went back to, and so he got the job and came back to Eastern New Mexico, and I was a pitching coach there for 3 or 4 years, and it was awesome. Like, it just basically finally got to like actually take all these programs, put them into effect. And then probably towards the end of my time there is when kind of driveline was starting to become a little bit more popular. I met my wife, and she said, I'm not living in Portales, New Mexico, bud. Like, I'm a nurse in Albuquerque. So if you want to make this happen, you're going to have to move to Albuquerque. And so I looked at different stuff, and there was a job open at like kind of a low demographic school there in Albuquerque called Manzano High School, and I applied and got the job, and was doing that, and then so from that, my first year there, I met Mitchell Parker. He was a 16-year-old kid, and just amazing, pretty talented kid, and hey, here's some really good information, Mitchell. Like, this is how you do it. And I think that first year we got like 7 kids signed to go play college baseball. And Mitchell was a junior that year, and then he was a senior, and then graduated to San Jack and so forth. But we had another kid named Ruger Bravo who's finishing up his year at his 4th year at Eastern New Mexico University. Like, just awesome, changing. But while I was there, I met Mike Foote. And Ryan Brewer, who's really, like, a lot of people know Ryan Brewer. Ryan Brewer is basically started Albuquerque Baseball Academy with Mike Foote, and Ryan Brewer's out of Texas, played at Texas Tech, amazing coach. It's just a very eccentric person, just awesome, just very, very awesome. Connect with the community, the college community, and just amazing recruiter. And anyway, he was running some 5-tool stuff, and he said, "Hey man, you want to come, do some, we're building a new facility. You want to come do some pitching stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll come in and do stuff." I said, "I'm a little different." And he's like, "Yeah, we know you're different." So I started in one cage with a little, like, kind of L screen drop down net with a horse mat hanging off it. I had 4 kids. Davis Pratt, Andrew Duran were 2 of the kids that were in it. And we just put them on a program. And, we're like 6-8 weeks in, and we're freaking got the music cranked up. We're doing pull downs, and freaking, if kids are lighting up freaking red or gun, and everybody's looking over in that cage going, "What the heck is going on over there?" You know what I mean? And then, that following, I think, winter, I think I had like 20 kids sign up, and then it was like 50 kids. And then it was like, Mike approached me and said, "Hey, can you think you can do this? We can do this to the hitting side too." All of a sudden, with these kids, like, again, kids make you look like a great coach. Started developing some arms, and got to work with Chase Silseth, who's with the Angels now. Got to work with Mitchell. Mitchell got drafted, and then we started. Some of these arms just started coming up. My intent was, I wanted somebody to say, "Where are these arms out of New Mexico? What's New Mexico? Like, they're not known from, where the heck are all these arms coming out of New Mexico?" And so we just started building it, and it was like, here's Chase Silseth, here's Mitch Parker, here's Kenny Giles was there before. I didn't get to train him with this stuff, but I got to coach him. And then Alex Bregman. I didn't get to coach Alex, but he was just a phenomenal program. Mitch Garver. All these kids were coming out of this program, and again, the former guys I didn't get to train, but the later guys, with the pitching guys I did, and then got to build those up. And then all of a sudden, Davis Pratt's with Purdue. Andrew Duran, who was the original guy with me, is a pitcher with Lubbock Christian. I think they're ranked 4th in the nation in D2 right now, just finishing up. And then just started building out. And then Aiden May, Jacob Kamatzer with Oregon State right now.
Yeah, and they're doing okay.
Crushing. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah. And Reagan Hall, I think, could be one of the Big Ten freshmen pitchers of the year. He's phenomenally going out over there. And we sent a pipeline to Pima Community College down with Coach Ken Hockamy, and he does a great job with guys and just kind of sending guys around. And it's been really awesome. And then got to work with the UNM pitchers the last couple of years. They'll come in during the winter, and it's just been a blast. But really, that's kind of like all that came in. But it was really taking the work from Ron Wolforth, Brent Strom, that stuff, trying to apply it and get things going is where we've come from. But the next step, the next evolution was meeting. When I was at Eastern, I met Brian Conger at Tarleton State. He got to do some of the groundbreaking work with Modus, and I was like, man, he beat me to the punch. I was like, that's unreal. Like he got to do the Modus stuff, and so I got on the phone with Ben Hansen. I was like, and then Ben Buck, who was Brian Conger's assistant, I went to got the head coach job at Lamar Community College in Colorado. Went full in with Modus, and at that same time, I said I need to bring Modus to Albuquerque Baseball Academy, because we've got to do a better job of solving this issue with our arms, with injury rates, and this just makes too much sense. So I got to get on the phone with Ben Hansen, and it's crazy because when you would call support for Modus, you know who would answer the phone? Casey
I'm
Mulholland.
assuming Ben.
No, Casey Mulholland. Casey
Oh my
Mulholland
gosh. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
was
back when he
literally
was
you get Ben Hansen, Casey Mulholland, like Casey learned from Ben, and it was unreal, right? And then so just really trying to apply that information was unreal, game changing. Like understand what workload management was. Got to meet Robin Lund, got to meet Brian Conger. So during COVID, when COVID hit, we got on a 20 group meeting. There's Brian Conger organized it, and it was Brian Conger, Casey, Devin Rose, Robin Lund, some guys, Ben Buck, and we would sit and we would talk about workload management, and we'd talk about how to build this thing and how do we push this game forward? How do we get people to understand this workload management piece, how it's a big piece of the puzzle. And so it was awesome, just kind of getting in on that and understanding, we put it in with our kids, and when you have 60, 70 kids going, it's intimidating to try to manage 70 kids workload. But when every single kid's wearing a pulse chip and they're throwing in, it's winter and they're throwing into a net, we can pretty much manage. Hey man, you're out of 15, you're done. Hey, you're out of 10, you're done. And hey, you need to get to an 18, you're not done yet. And so it was really cool to try to really get to learn some of those initial pieces with workload management. And I still remember the podcast with Ben Hansen and Eric Cressy, and I think that because Ben is just pioneer when it comes to motion capture and biomechanics. They had one of the better biomechanics labs in the country at Modus. I think he got to do his internship or did groundbreaking work with the Brewers, who were the original motion capture lab in Major League Baseball, and so it was really awesome to get that piece. But I just remember that that podcast he was talking about. Well, when the front foot hits, are you at 90 degrees? Is the arm elbow extension at 90 degrees, outside of 90, inside 90? And I remember Ben saying, we looked at the torque values on it at 90 degrees and outside 90, and guess what? It was the same. It was there was no correlation, because the big buzzword at that time was form fly out, right? Everybody's like, you got to have these perfect mechanics. Got to have these perfect mechanics, and they're like, is it? There's something missing. When Pro Play AI came out, right? And I got to meet Dr. Mike Son, got to beta test that tool. He's like, hey, here's this thing. We want to get a bunch of captures. I was literally the number one downloader of videos. I would do 3 freaking motion captures per kid, every day. I was entrenched wanting to learn. I need to figure this out.
And knowing Mike, he probably absolutely loved that.
Oh man, he was awesome. He talk about support, dude. Dr. Mike Son is freaking unreal. Just genius, way ahead of his time. And him and Casey just going through this stuff is man, this is phenomenal information, and going to markerless motion capture, marker-based motion capture, started buying in, learning that and getting some stuff from Driveline. And it was funny because when Driveline put out their first Foundations of Pitching certification, right? It's just beautiful work by Sam Breen, right? Sam Breen put together the Foundations of Pitching program and really kind of developed it. And Kyle and Sam, is with the Yankees, is just freaking, talk about an outlier. The dude's amazing. He's, when it comes to a generalist, he's just unreal. He knows strength conditioning, knows pitch biomechanics, he knows workload management. the guy's a dude. And so when he put that out, I remember I flew down to Driveline to get the foundations of pitching certification. It was funny because there was a guy there, and his name is Jordan Baltimore. I think he's out with Empire Athletics out of New York, and we're sitting there kind of getting ready to take the test for the deal. And I finished the test and kind of turned it in, and I was kind of watching Jordan Baltimore, and he's finishing, and like he was pretty dead set on being the first certified Driveline guy. And I was like, and so every time I see Jordan Baltimore, I was like, hey, aren't you the second guy that was ever certified in Driveline Foundation? I got a kick out of that. I've always been wanting to learn, and Kyle put out a great product. Sam put out a great product. Basically they've taken the constraints-led approach and systemized it and done an amazing job with it. You know what I mean? So,
Oh yeah,
pretty awesome.
it's crazy what can happen when you are curious. You go into things with an open mind and you're willing to take chances. That's obviously what you did that has afforded you all these opportunities. I know it's funny. You go into this and you say, "Gosh, I don't know if I want to bounce around too much." But then how don't you when you've had all these different opportunities and every one of them is a sliding doors moment where you could have turned around, you could have said no, you could have stopped, but each time you said yes, it's enabled you to continue down this path. And just like anybody in the baseball world, everything is interconnected. The world gets smaller and smaller the farther you go because everybody knows somebody who knows another person. And that's how you end up in all these conversations. And that's ultimately what's pushing our industry forward. So I appreciate you going down the rabbit hole with every one of those things. And I know one of the things that we definitely wanted to talk about today coming into this is, yes, we're in this injury epidemic as it's being called. I'll go ahead and throw that out there. I'm on board with using that term. It's so hard
Yeah,
just coming off of the heels of
sure.
COVID and everything else in the world. But yeah, it really is an epidemic. And one of the things that has kind of been villainized is mechanics, and nobody throws the way that Nolan Ryan used to throw or Sandy Koufax used to throw. Well, both of those guys got hurt. it's not talked about because one of them threw 100 miles per hour and one of them is another one of the greatest pitchers of all time, but he could
Right,
have used Tommy John if Tommy John existed back then. So
right.
mechanics are never going to be the answer as far as I'm concerned. Yes, they can help you move better, they can help you perform better, and maybe they can reduce some injury risk. But to me, it's not the ultimate determining factor. I know you feel similarly, but I'd love for
Yeah.
you to dig a little bit deeper on that. I know that's what you were getting
So,
into with Ben
yeah,
Hansen and forearm flyout
sure.
and torque
Yeah,
levels.
no, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot this is probably as packed of a topic as it gets, and it's something I'm really passionate about when it comes to mechanics, and really what opened my eyes, quite frankly, was being introduced to Ryan Croton with arm care, being introduced to dynamometry, and being introduced to kind of the strength piece, right? I'm a big Pavel Tsatsline guy, a strong first guy, like strength first, strength matters a lot. I think mechanics are, again, why can't you do both? You got to have good mechanics and you got to have strength. Like there's no reason why it should be strength or just mechanics. But the problem is on the mechanic side is, yeah, so let's produce a very efficient delivery. Efficient is the key, like the least amount of stress to produce the most amount of force. That's mechanics. But the thing is we as human beings are the ultimate compensators. We're the ultimate compensator. What I mean by that is, like, part of our compensation patterns is what makes us unique, right? The way that Nolan Ryan throws is not the way Sandy Koufax throws. When I started looking at mechanics, and like, we can't, there's this myth of this one ideal mechanical model. And then there's this myth, in my opinion, this myth of like that there's just one way to throw a baseball, and that's where ecological dynamics and the beautiful work by Rob Gray and just understanding what ecological dynamics are, and quite frankly rooted in the Bernstein principle, the body organizes itself based upon the goal of the activity. The thing about mechanics is, like, you've got to look at how people move, how a player moves, what do they prefer to move. Now, I went to Randy Sullivan this past October, and I went with the intent of this. I wanted to talk to Franz Bosch, and I wanted to ask him, and I wanted to talk to Rob Gray. Like, that was like, oh, I got to spend $1,000, whatever, get access to talk to these guys and I did. I got to talk to them for like an hour. Big things that are out there right now is movement preferences, right? The movement MPE, the movement preferences. I think the coach from Maryland is all in. I think the Giants. There's a bunch of schools that are going into the movement preferences. And I asked Franz Bosch, what's your opinion on the movement experts? He goes, well, it's just archetyping, Tim, but it doesn't take into account the problem with archetyping. It's very important. I think it gives you the bigger part of the bell curve, but it doesn't. Again, you always got to take into account the outliers, right? And
the
so
anomalies, of course.
Yeah, and so it's like, again, if you try to fit everybody into the middle bell curve, you'll go. But my goal is like, I want hyper individualization. I want to know what each kid is doing, and I don't want to screw one kid up. So I may take a kid that, he may have a movement preference to be a quad dominant guy. He may back knee drives towards third base and gets down the mound. And yeah, if I try to turn him into a vertical shin guy, I'm going to screw him up. But if I use a constraints-led approach or differential learning to help him optimize how he moves, because I could still be in a movement preference and still get hurt. You know what I mean? I could still wear out because if I don't have enough variability or I don't have enough strength, if I get overused, all those things can still give me, even if I'm a quad preferred guy, I'm a supination preferred guy, and I'm following that to a T. I'm not getting outside then it goes into like workload management, strength, all those things. So it goes back into strength shielding, right? So you've got to look at the throwing mechanics, and then you got to look, okay, where do I need to strength shield? Where do I need to stress shield? And this is where the beautiful work that like being introduced by your father, being introduced me to Keith Barr in his awesome work on tendons is learning what's happening at the tendon. And that changed my whole world. And I think all these things come from desperation, not inspiration, right? And here's the story. We had a kid that got hurt this past summer, strained his UCL, basically again through too many pitches. His tissue met tolerance, and he had a grade 1 strain. And so he shut down. Got to talk with his family friend, happened to be a really highly touted surgeon, an expert, and got in with him. Got MRI, got PRP, and we followed the return to throw protocol. They gave me kind of the general return to throw protocol, which is the ASMI or the Stanford medicine, the return to throw protocol. I voiced my displeasure to the parents and said, well, I'm okay with that, but we're going to monitor it with pulse as well. We're going to monitor it, and because I want to make sure that there's no spikes. And we did. And sure enough, he had some spikes. And when he spiked on his workload, he was sore. And so we had our physical therapist monitoring we used the arm care app to the dynamometry to monitor internal, external rotation, making sure that it was balanced. We were monitoring his grip strength with the dynamometer. We were tracking everything. And when he spiked, we backed out. We really monitored everything, and we got him through his return to throw. Then we got into return to performance. We got things going. I headed out to Wake Forest, got to meet you guys, and we got on with the Flex Pro. And actually, Dr. Freehill's the one that recommended it, and it was just a brilliant doctor. I went into Wake Forest with some specific questions for yourself and your dad, and after talking with it, was like, yeah, we've got to have this, because the big thing that made the most sense to me, and I want to get to the story first, but the big thing that made the most sense to me is I saw a hole in our assessment, and it's nothing against the arm care, nothing against any system. Every system has, again, inherent strength, inherent weakness. Well, the inherent strength is that you get to measure strength. The inherent weakness, I think, of the arm care is that you have to use your thumb. So you're using your thumb, and so it's not giving you a full picture on it, because our guys, grip strength was money. You know what I mean? Like arm score, everything, grip strength was above the 25 percentile. Like everything was great. So anyway, we got this kid back, came back up to return to throw. I mean, got to return to throw, return to performance. He's getting ready to go to a tryout for school, and is literally up to 88 miles an hour. Like only had thrown 82, 84 before, just done. He's in probably the third week of his kind of ramping. Everything's feeling great. Strength levels are good across the board. Strength levels across the board are good. Been on the Flex Pro for about a month. We're still trying to make sense of what that was. Full disclosure on my side, I was still learning. And about 10 pitches into a live at bat deal, he walked off, and I saw this face. And it was re-injured. And that face, if you're a coach or you're a pitching coach and you get that face and you see that injury, it is the most gut-wrenching, the worst face. I know you've had it because you've experienced it. I've had it when I was in high school. I never got Tommy John. I basically couldn't pitch without a brace. I mean, I did my own old school way of doing it, but I saw that face and I was just gut-wrenched. And I went back out of desperation. I went back to your dad and to you, and I said, what did I miss? What did we miss here? You know, what did we miss? Like I mean, I followed the book. We did the ASMI return to throw. We followed pulse, workload management. He had his mechanics. I'm telling you, he had the lowest amount of biomechanical, the lowest amount of stress that he's ever had on his elbow, the least amount of torque compared to his velocity of ever before. His delivery is more efficient than it's ever been. And he got hurt. And I'm like, what's going on? And so we looked at it. He started off, his strength levels were in the 25 percentile. His strength levels were in the 25 percentile for an average high school athlete. Average high school athlete throws 80 miles an hour. So he's in the 25 percentile of a kid throwing 80 miles an hour. He worked on it for about 4 to 5 weeks. He got his strength levels up to around the 50th percentile, okay, of a high school athlete. Again, 80 miles an hour. The problem is he's throwing 88 miles an hour. His strength levels need to be in the 95th percentile to match. And just not saying that if a kid's in the 95th percentile, they're never going to hurt, but we've got to stress shield that kid. I didn't do enough to shield. And quite frankly, in the first month, based off of Keith Barr's research, in the first month of strength training, okay, you get about a 0 to 3% increase in stiffness to the tendon. After going into month 2, you get about a 5 to 15% increase in stiffness to the tendon. And then after 3 months, you're in that 60% range. So really, it takes about 3 months to create some stiffness to that tendon. And so we were on the right track. We were working on his strength levels, but he wasn't there yet. And had I known that information, that would have been a great time to just sit back and say, no, I know you can throw 88, but we're not going to yet. We're going to make sure that your strength levels match and your shielding matches your output levels. So from that, I was like, hey, man, I've got another kid that had some proximal strain. He hadn't been diagnosed, but I know he's in pain. So let's test him. So we tested him, and your dad noticed something significantly weird, odd about him. His fingertip flexion compared to his mid finger flexion was off significantly. His fingertip flexion was in the 170s, 160s, which puts him in like the 65, 70 percentile. And his mid finger was like 109. Like it was I think your dad's strength was higher than his.
Yeah, it was
like, wait a second. Yeah, it was like, wait, why is my mid finger, which is, we're talking approximately a difference of like a half an inch. How does that so much different? And then what it came down to is that, when the mid finger is really, those origins of the mid finger on the FDS goes to the proximal part of the muscle, whereas the fingertip goes more to the distal part, goes to more
the insertion point of the UCL.
Yeah, the urgent port, kind of basically the sublime tubercle. So
yes.
It's like, so you get to those spots, and so sure enough, his mid finger. And so you went back and asked him, like, hey, where was your pain come from? Well, it's right on the bone. It's more proximal. Holy crap. And so I think your dad went back and looked at all the data and checked with other people. And sure enough, everyone that was having a proximal pain or proximal issue, their mid finger pull was significantly different. And so what it came back to, it's like, when you sprain your ankle and you rest it, and you do those things and you rehab it and they strengthen all things around it, but you never really rehab it. You don't get those strength levels back. It makes it more vulnerable to injury because it's not balanced. And so we attacked it. We your dad and yourself came up with a protocol, and we went 3-to-1 attacking the mid finger strength compared to the fingertip strength. And within a period of 3 to 6 weeks, his mid finger pull came on par with his fingertip, and his overall strength went up to the 95th percentile. The kid's throwing 92 to 94. I felt really great about him getting back on the mound, because not only did he have the requisite strength to handle that, He had balance within the muscle itself, which is huge. Like you can have an imbalance within just your forearm muscle, and we don't even know about that. Like there's no way to test it except for with this product, and it's unreal to have that and to be aware of that. Most people just aren't aware of that, and so awareness in itself is curative, right? We got that piece and line him up, and man, he's been phenomenal. Now, on the other side of that, you go back to workload management. He went back in, threw 50 pitches his first outing, threw like 60 pitches his next outing, threw 70 his next outing. I'm like, okay, we're cool. Like we got a couple things. Next outing, 100 pitches. I'm
Oh
like,
my gosh.
no. After that third outing goes from like 70 to 100. Guess what? Hey, coach, my shoulder's kind of bothering me. And he's a really good hyper abducted guy. Like he generates a lot of torque. With his delivery, we've got to really stress shield the anterior portion of the shoulder, right? We got to do a lot of yielding isometrics. We got to really strengthen the front part of the shoulder. But even if we do all that stuff, it's not going to protect it if you get that jump of that big of a spike in workload. It got to the point now, it's like, hey, the only way to get you back now is we're going to have to shut you down a little bit, get back to some basic stuff and build out, because the end goal for him is to pitch at a high level, to get to his Division I school. And so before we do any more damage, because the front part of the shoulder, you're looking at a probably a type 2 slap or any type of thing like that, where you're getting, when that arm lays back, the front part of that labrum is under so much shear force that starts to tug on it. So you've got to bulletproof that shoulder. But the key finding was, again, understanding the tendon and the tissue quality and how to really grasp that, looking at imbalances. That's the great piece about arm care or using dynamometry. Not to promote this or that, we fully invested in force frames, like fixed dynamometers now, because I know that we've got to improve our upper limb and lower limb strength. And the way to do that and the way to get those is through long, slow isometrics. If you haven't got into some of Keith Barr's work, like I highly recommend people dive into that work. It's groundbreaking. And the key, though, is applying it. So we're based off of this information. We are now in the phase of introducing this to our youth program. We're going to start at 13, 14. We're going to introduce basically the dynamometry to them. We're going to introduce our grip strength with FlexPro product to start getting an awareness. If you don't know where you're at on the map is useless. You got to know where you're at. And if you're not assessing, you don't know. The biggest thing that I learned when I started assessing strength was, man, it's amazing how much internal rotation strength you gain and external rotation strength you lose when you start throwing. On the flip side, there are kids that are the exact opposite. There are kids that are really lax or really hypermobile, or that get a really good deep hyperabduction or horizontal abduction. Those kids are going to be very weak internally and very strong externally as they throw, because as the arm lays back, it has to really rapidly decelerate, get to an isometric, and then accelerate. And if those anterior structures are not bulletproof strong, then they're going to start failing, and your body can only do so much. So you've got to do, as a strength coach, as a position coach, you have to really stress shield. And that's where it goes back to, I think the biomechanics are extremely important, but I think they're important for knowing where the risk factors are at. How do you identify where this guy's weakest links are going to be? If they're an early trunk rotator, they're going to get an early trunk rotation, they're going to lay back really fast, you better stress shield the front of that shoulder. If they're a quad dominant linear guy that gets down the line, you better bulletproof the posterior part of that shoulder. You got to really prove the eccentric strength of that lead hip. Like, you can stress shield based off what their mechanics look like. And if you're going to change somebody's mechanics, you better know why. If you're going to change somebody's mechanics, you got to know. Like, for me, I think one of the most brilliant things that I learned was, I think as a pitching coach, there's really two things that you can influence. You can influence stride length and you can influence tempo. If I increase stride length, I'm going to minimize rotation. If I decrease stride length, I'm going to improve rotation. Okay, so those are just those factors, right? It's like, you get a kid that's really rotational and is having a hard time throwing strikes. You increase their stride length. Guess what? They throw more strikes. Why? Because they're so rotational. It's really hard to time. So you can influence that, but you better know that there's consequences, because if you take a guy that's a long strider, right, a quad dominant guy that gets down the mound, he's a linear type pitcher, and now I get him to be more rotational, guess what happens? The medial elbow and the front of the shoulder start taking on more stress. Research has clearly shown if you shorten the stride length, rotation goes up, which means it's going to put more stress on the medial elbow and the front shoulder. Doesn't mean it's bad, but you better train for it. You better prepare for it. So know the consequences of what mechanical change you're making. If you're going to make a mechanical change, there's got to be pain or poor performance before you do it. If there's no pain, there's no poor performance, leave them alone. Let them adjust. And if you're going to make adjustment, you got to know why. I mean, you got to know how. If you're going to make an adjustment, you got to use a constraints-led approach, because you've got to take them out of you've got to destabilize the movement preference. Have you ever seen like a kid when they first learn to catch? The first thing they do is they throw their thumb straight to the ground and they do this, right? And so every time, like we got kids that could be 13 years old and they've never got out of that. Their first movement is to do that. And so what do you have to do? You have to destabilize that movement attractor. You've got to put a constraint, put their elbow down to where they have to catch the ball with their thumbs up. And so that destabilizes their movement solution. It makes them create a new movement solution. You myelinate that sucker and you go through repetition and go through that process, create variability, you challenge the system. Guess what? You create a new attractor. You create a new movement solution. And now that sucker becomes stable under pressure. The words get in the way. The body doesn't care what the coach has to say. The body's trying to solve a movement solution. And it has affordances, it has movement solutions that it goes back to. Unless you destabilize those and find a more efficient, robust solution that the body prefers, it's not going to change. I probably get called out on this, but like I am not a one-on-one lesson person. I think like people come to me and say, hey, can we do a one-on-one lesson? And I almost say, well, it's going to be $400 because it's a waste of time. If you want to throw away money to go to a casino, like you have a better chance of getting something. Like unless you're getting consistent movement solutions, getting consistent training over the course of time, over the course of several weeks, the movement's not going to change. You're not going to get any better. So we've changed all of our training platform to have consistent training. It's all movement pattern based. It's all letting their body organize itself within a constraints-led approach. God's a way better pitching coach than I'll ever be. Letting their body organize itself to accomplish the goal. But that's a hard concept because people are absolutely addicted to one-on-one lessons.
There's another perfect example of a fantastic rabbit hole. We start with mechanics. There's no one perfect way to throw, and we eventually get down to the path of you guys at ABA and your phone call helping us change the way we assess individuals with Flex Pro Grip. Now we're well on our way to research, collecting data, publishing more information that's going to help save the arms of future big leaguers, college players, high school kids, whoever it is. And that never would have happened without a phone call. So it speaks to, again, the baseball world getting smaller and smaller and the ability to have these connections and just pick up the phone and the willingness to learn more. Right. If you're not walking into this with your thinking cap on, the openness, the ability to be curious, and the amazing trait to admit what you don't know, we're never going to get to this point. Then we can round it all out with the way you train. Now that you talk about the way you train, I kind of want to round this out with what we're doing with the youth population. And you talk about Keith Barr, you're already having these young kids do isometric holds, which I'm sure they hate you now, but 3 years from now, they'll absolutely love you for it because isometrics are a headache in waiting if you've never done them before. But yeah, I'd love to hear your take on the current scope of youth training, what you're looking at changing, and why you think this will be so impactful for your group, and then maybe even for baseball as a whole, if there's something that youth baseball could take away from ABA.
Well, the first thing when it comes to youth baseball, there's obviously the two camps, right? The one camp is there's only a limited amount of bullets that you can take. The other camp is you got to prepare the body for the stress of throwing. Now, here's the thing: there's got to be some common sense within this, and what the biggest thing that I've learned when it comes to youth training. We had a 10-year-old kid come in. Obviously, in New Mexico, you have fall ball, you have spring ball. You know, kids are pitching and throwing and doing stuff. And And one of the most common things you'll see in a youth thrower is medial epicondylitis. Basically, the growth plate on the medial elbow is getting tugged on, and that growth plate gets inflamed and it gets pissed off, and it starts flaring up on kids. Obviously, you've got to rest, and that's where I think understanding pitch counts, workload management, stuff like that's extremely important at the youth level. Like being able to not to overly expose these kids, but at the same token, understanding that those tendons are developing cores. The core of the tendon, I think Keith Barr says that the core of the tendon is actually like fully developed by the time you're 17. But at the outside of that tendon is where you can really, manipulate and have some type of changing to it. So, what scared the heck out of me is we had a 10-year-old kid come in complaining of medial epicondylitis or complaining of medial elbow pain. Sent him to the doc to get an x-ray. The mom brings back the x-ray, and I almost got sick. I was like, oh my God, this kid's got an avulsion fracture. Like I'm thinking, like you can clearly see the medial epicondyle and you can clearly see like space, and you see it, and I'm like, oh my God, like this kid's got an avulsion fracture. And so the kid goes and sees the orthopedic for the follow-up, and no, he didn't have an avulsion fracture. That was simply how wide the growth plate was. Whoa. Like it was literally like dark in between the medial epicondyle and the bone. Like, and it floored me how pliable, how malleable that bone is in these 9 through 13-year-old kids that are going through this growth plate, like that their growth plates are wide open. Like understanding that, having an awareness of that, it should be education 101 is like the bone is weaker than the tendon and the ligament. I promise you. And when those kids are cranking on that, and they're not getting proper recovery time, it's unreal, like how pliable it is. And so we've got to understand that as a youth coach. We've got to understand that what we're doing is affecting those tissues. Wolff's law is how the bone adapts. And Wolff's law says the bone actually retroverts, or it becomes more dense. But if you're not putting stress on it, the answer is not to just put no stress. You've got to put meaningful stress in appropriate doses with appropriate rest. And that's where, what we do is like once we hit October 31st, we hit November 1, we're done throwing. We're still doing our power arm program. We do not pick up a baseball for 8 weeks. What we do though, we do water bags, we do movement programs, we throw our medicine balls, we do all of those things. We get on the Proteus, we get on all these things. We're doing strength work with isometrics, because what Keith Barr says about collagen fibers, right? So when you have a breakdown in tissue, okay, at the tendon unit, the body starts to rebuild, and it rebuilds with collagen fibers. So the definition of a scar is disorganized collagen fibers. It's just disorganized collagen fibers. They lay down whatever. So when you don't apply force, those collagen fibers just lay down any which way they want. After we do that, we've got to purposefully lay down those collagen fibers in the line of force. The only way to line up the collagen fibers is to create some type of muscle contraction. You can do that simply on the very low end. Mark Pro. Throw a Mark Pro on there. Get the lymphatic system working, applying a low level force of getting blood flow. That's one way. Using low, slow, long 30-second isometrics. Now, the concept is called a long, slow isometric with minimal jerk. So you got to understand first, what is jerk? So like you heard of clean and a jerk. A jerk is a rapid acceleration and a rapid deceleration followed by a rapid acceleration. It's a change in acceleration. That's the definition of jerk. The change in acceleration. We want to minimize jerk, and we want to offer this long, slow, like 30% of 1 rep max force. And so what happens is when we're applying this force, it's kind of like doing a static stretch, and I'll get into that in a second. So if we do a long, slow isometric, what happens is after a period of time of holding that low isometric force, the tendon starts to turn off. The tendon starts to say, okay, I can relax. And the muscle has to start doing work. Okay, so it starts to, and so it starts creating stiffness. It starts creating shielding. It starts to glide, and it just gives you a creep. I'm sorry, it calls the
Tendon
creep.
creep.
tendon creeps, and it starts turning to the muscle, and then now the muscle starts burning, right? Well, the muscle's burning because it's changing the pH of the muscle. It's changing, it's getting infused with calcium. It's getting, the muscle is getting fatigued, which is what we want, because the tendon's starting to turn off. The tendon's saying, hey, I'm not doing any more work, dude, I'm done. Let the muscle do it. And so that longer hold is important. So that's a great argument for why we shouldn't static stretch before we play. Because if I'm doing a long 30-second static stretch, that Golgi tendon organ, which is within the muscle spindle, is now being inhibited, and it's turning the tendon off. And now we're trying to make that thing move ballistically. And it's like, hey, dude, you just told me to relax, and now you want me to turn on again? Like, I'm out. And that's where we're starting again. That's where those injuries happen. In those ballistic movements, they happen at the tendon. They don't happen in the muscle belly. Very rarely. Like, I think 5 to 10% of injuries happen at the muscle belly. They mainly happen at the tendon because it's happening rapidly. Because the muscle is anchoring and the tendon's moving back and forth. When we do long, slow movements, strength movements, the tendon anchors and then the muscle lengthens and contracts. So we've got to, if you understand that physiology, it's really important. So with our youth side, what we try to do in our off season is create these isometric contractions, creating stress shielding, creating stiffness. Because if we spend November and December, that's 2 months of strength shielding, right? So going back to Keith Barr's work, you get 2 months of strength shielding, and then by third month we get like a 61% increase in stiffness. When we get to January, where we start adding in our slow ramp up of throwing, so that way by February we can start getting into practice. Now we got 3 months of stress shielding. We've got some really good stiffness to the tendon, increased stiffness to the tendon unit, and now we've got protection. That's the key. So what I'm trying to do is introduce that to our youth program. But the key is the timing. Like, when do you start it, right? You've got to start it in a phase that we're protecting. So when we go to our off season for our high school kids, now we get our high school kids who get into the off season. Unfortunately, in America, you just don't shut down. October is now showcase season. So now what we've got to do is we've got to really find some opportune windows to where we can get some tissue resilience built in. We got to have real conversations with parents like, hey, we've got to get some stress shielding in here. We've got to get some strength training in here before we get to this. So we've got to make some of those decisions. What are we showcasing right now? Building that piece out and understanding the long game of this. It's a real challenge trying to build that out. But I think the key to all of this, for me, where it starts with the youth, is frequent observation windows. And what dynamometry does, being able to using these force plates like the Flex Pro that's able to isolate what's going on with the hand, with the forearm, is you're able to get a window into fatigue. You get a glimpse into the window of where they're at strength wise and muscle balance. But if you get those frequent observation windows, it keeps you from going off too far from the path. So that's my beef on biomechanics. We do a biomechanics assessment. You get all markered up, you do a motion capture, and it tells you, you're inefficient at this, you're this and that, and you need to make these changes. Okay, great. So I go in and I prescribe all these drills. I create a program. I have them start changing their mechanics, and they go through. And then what? When do I get my next biomechanics report? 6 months down the road, 8 months down the road? When can I afford another $3,000 to go a motion capture? Or even if I got a markerless motion capture, I do those once or twice a week. What I'm looking for, what I'm excited about, what's coming with markerless motion capture and soon to come, is basically what I want to know is from bullpen to bullpen, from outing to outing, how is my biomechanics changing? So if I'm trying to improve my biomechanical efficiency of where my arm is at foot plant, based off of our biomechanics, we look at it and you're most efficient when you're at 90 degrees. Great. Your velocity goes up. Everything's good. That's where you need to be. But so you're trying to make a biomechanical change. How good am I at doing that? Am I on the right road to doing that? I can't check once every 6 weeks. I got to check that from outing to outing. I want to know what my biomechanics look like on Friday and then next Friday. And that way, if I'm looking at it and I see space between those lines, I should see line over line after line. That shows that my mechanics are consistent. When I start seeing space, that's change. I'm going to look at stride length. Man, your stride length is contracting by 3 or 4 inches. I like to know that. If I'm not frequently assessing that, I don't know that. So now colleges that have Kinetracks, like Wake Forest, University of Arizona, I think just got like schools that are now Kinetrack schools, they're able to get in-game biomechanics data. They should be looking at that every week. They should be able to look at that throughout the game and be able to go, listen, like, look at your biomechanics are changing. Is this good or bad? If there is it changing because we're trying to change something, or is it not? Like, that's where I think biomechanics are going to play a key role. And whichever company comes out with a way to measure biomechanics from bullpen to bullpen or start to start and get that data within 3 to 4 minutes of when it's happening, and just be able to see from pitch to pitch what's changing, then you're in business. Then biomechanics are effective, because hey, dude, you're going down this path over here and it's not good. We had a kid that went from coach wanted to get him to do the vertical shin, and worked all fall on getting him in the vertical shin. And he went from like 92 to like 88, couldn't throw a strike, and developed a wonderful 9-9 vertical break, horizontal break fastball. We did awesome. And so when we got back and started working with them, it was like, what did you do in high school? Well, I really just tried to get down the mound. I tried to push. And I'm like, okay, let's try a walking windup. Let's get you down the mound a little bit. And then did biomechanics on him. And then the next week did a pitch on him. And not only did that, put him on TrackMan, and went from a 9-9 profile to next week it was like 12-8. And then it was 15-7. And then it was 28. But I was able to check and monitor him if we're going down that path, not, hey, do this and good luck. That's the problem, is we just don't frequently observe enough. And that's where I think dynamometry, I think the Flex Pro Grip, I think, getting a markerless motion capture, a cheap markerless motion capture, whether it's Uplift, whether it's Pro Play AI, whether it's just your phone. And like, the gold standard is not markerless motion capture. To me, it's Bob Kai's. And his digitization. Like, Bob Kai's is literally the gold standard when it comes to markerless motion capture. Basically, Trevor Bauer every year before at the end and the beginning of every year would go see Bob Kai's. He's out of Utah, and I mean he's got a book called The Biomechanics of Hitting, The Biomechanics of Pitching, and he's been doing basically in-game digitization of mechanics for longer than anybody in the world. Like, he is the foremost professional when it comes to it. Bob Kai's he's the GOAT. But his concept is, I need to look at in-game data. Like, all this other stuff is a different environment. It's not happening. It's not what's going on. The technology's coming. Within the next, I'd say 3 to 5 years, you're going to start seeing pro teams leveraging in-game data from inning to inning, and looking for space and going, look, at this dude's mechanics are changing. Why can't he get through the third time through the order? His mechanics have changed a lot. Like, his fitness level is not good. Like, these are things that you can control and train for. Like, that's upper level stuff. That's the stuff that I think when coaches start going into that realm, that's going to change the game. So I think if we can apply that at the youth level, starting off with like just getting a foundation. And the biggest thing I would say for the youth level is quit trying to make everyone look the same. Quit trying to make every kid do the same mechanics. Every kid needs to come up, down, out. I coach an 11U team, and we're a developmental team. We're playing another team, and the coach is screaming, control the lead leg, throw as hard as you want. Control the lead leg. Just control the lead leg. Hey, you're not controlling the lead leg. Control the lead leg. And I'm thinking to myself, do you know how hard it is to throw the ball over the plate? And now you got this kid thinking about his lead leg. My mind's about, I have to go to left field and just so that I
take a walk.
Don't
yeah
yeah, just because
decompress.
Just quit giving this kid's internal cues. Give the body a goal. Let the body organize itself. They're going to be fine. I promise you. So just trying to, with youth baseball for me is like giving these kids the gutters, throwing the bumpers in the gutters, giving them a framework to develop their patterns, keep them in their own movement preferences that they do, create a really robust environment where they got to solve a multitude of movement solutions, throw long toss, throw athletic catch play, throw hard, throw soft, throw different weights of balls, throw different size of balls. I'll tell you what, the best effect I've had on any kids when it comes to command has been the differential balls from driveline. I mean,
Okay.
we set up a 9-hole. We put them up and we shorten the distance by there. Here, you're going to throw a bullpen today. I got a bucket of every ball that's in there, and I say you randomly grab a ball, and you're just going to count. You're going to go 15 throws, and what's your record? If it goes inside the 9-hole, you get a point. And they play. Hey, I got 10 points today. Holy cow, you're awesome. And that's it. And then we keep track of it. So when kids come away, it's like, hey, how did practice go today? Yeah, I hit a new record on my command training today. And that movement solution is way more than you'll ever do doing a freaking one-on-one lesson with the coach sitting on his phone. Yep, there you go. Stay back. Yep, control the lead leg. Like, the kids have figured out. I mean, I got kids that throw from here. I got kids that throw from here. And I told them one thing. Every kid will do this drill. Every kid will do that drill, but they'll do it in their own way. Let the kids discover. Let the kids organize. Let them figure out their body types. Let's not create robots. Let's create some really dynamic, robust throwers that can handle a multitude, a variety of situations. And man, I'll tell you what comes out of the other end is you got a kid that throws from here and a kid that throws from here and a kid that does different patterning stuff. And it's like, it's awesome. That's, to me, is the goal with youth baseball, is to understand their bodies are wide open, malleable, and man, we got to really take advantage of some of these windows of training to really give them some cool stuff. So that's my approach.
Got to create the next Mitchell Parker.
Yeah, got to create a few of those. I tell you what, and I know every coach out there that's ever been to a major league debut. I didn't get to go to Chase Silseth when he pitched with the Angels, but like, I got to go to Mitchell's, and I'm like, man, I sure want to do that a bunch more. It's awesome. On the flip side of that is, not only do I want to go to a lot more of those, I don't ever want to go to the meetings where the kid's dejected because I didn't know. Like, my training had a hole in it. And what keeps me up at night, what I wake up at 2:00 thinking about, is what can I do for that one kid that might get hurt? What can I do for that one kid that just needs something a little different? Am I a hammer and everybody looks like a nail? How do I have a multitude of tools in my belt so that when this kid comes in, I can solve this puzzle? I can help this, not me solve, but how can I help this kid solve this puzzle? And that's what it's about. I mean, there's a lot of pieces. There's workload management, there's strength, there's long-term development, there's pitch design, like all those things, man. There's a lot that goes into it. And the biggest thing I can say is, if you don't know, man, just be quiet and let them figure it out. like, don't be in a rush to coach, man. The words get in the way.
Yeah, we can do a lot more harm than good most of the time. These kids will figure it out, like you said. Just give them the guardrails, give them the bumpers. I guarantee they'll get to the destination or wherever it is they want to go, as long as you make it fun and you have some fun tools along the way to help them out.
Oh man, the gamification. Ron Wolforth, I loved his approaches. We're competing with video games. What's so great about video games? Well, they're really engaging. They're competitive. They're hard. They keep score, right? They keep score. So there's, you win or lose. And then after you die, you spawn again, right? You get to play again, and it encourages. It says, game over, play again. Same thing, man. I try to create everything that we do in our program is that model. Let's make it competitive. Let's be objective. Let's score it. And when they fail, let's tell them to play again. And let's do that with every station we can. Let's try to create an environment where these kids get such a robust environment that they're just, man, this is awesome. So, I mean, everything we do is built up. I mean, we're leaderboard. We got leaderboard city here. It's just like, it's awesome.
Well, I'm scared of what other rabbit holes we might go down here. We've crushed it a good bit, and I know there's so much more to uncover. So this is probably a good spot to call it for the first time we have you on. I know you will be a reoccurring guest on here, Tim. We really appreciate what you're doing for the kids, as well as what you're doing for us at Flex Pro Grip. You've been awesome to work with, and we look forward to continuing that partnership. But thanks again, man. It's really been great to hear from you on here.
It's an absolute pleasure, and like I said, that the groundbreaking work that you guys are doing with this product, I really think we have an opportunity to change baseball. Like I've never felt so confident that's can happen than I do in the next few years. Some really amazing things are happening, and I really appreciate. And I'll say this: I really want to get this out. Like the conversations I've had with your father and yourself, like I've never met someone so genuine that intuitively cares for the people that they're talking with than I have about your father and you. It's been amazing to just have somebody give a crap and are so passionate about getting it right and trying to find this thing. And I mean, it is unbelievable that someone has that care. I mean, I'm a raving fan. That's what it's all about. That's what gravitated me to you guys when I got to meet you at Wake Forest, and when I called in desperation, it was awesome, and I really appreciate that. I can't thank you guys enough, and I look forward to what's going on. I look forward to, like I said, braving some new paths. Can't thank guys like Ron Wolforth and Brent Strom and Kyle Bodie and Casey Mullen, Ben Hansen, all those guys that have come to learn from. It's been awesome. So I'm excited for the next one.
Well, thank you so much. That's really humbling. As long as you remember to look in the mirror and remind yourself that none of this is possible without somebody like you that's willing to take the chance, dive deep, and learn more, and then just spread the word. So, again, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And then to everyone tuning in, thank you for laying back with us. We'll see you next time.